Good evening to all of you. This is Piyush. So this is day 3rd of daily answer writing program of History Optional. Now what is the question? The question was critically examine the Itihasa-Purana tradition. How far do they help as a source of ancient India? Now in this particular question, as you can see, there are two parts. One which is asking you to critically examine the Itihasa-Purana tradition, and the second, how come it is helping us to recreate the history of ancient India. So these are two parts. One thing I must tell you in the beginning, when it comes to Itihasa-Purana tradition, that is mostly misunderstood by you. The moment it comes to Itihasa and Purana, there might be a different meaning, and that precisely indicates towards the epics, that is Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the Puranas, that is a distinct form or the genre of sources or genre of literature. But the moment it comes to Itihasa-Purana tradition, the origin of the Itihasa-Purana tradition could be noticed way back in the in the Vedas itself. So basically, as far as this Itihasa-Purana tradition is concerned, like multiple kind of questions can be framed out of it, and so far UPSC hasn't hunted all the possible dimensions. They have asked few of the dimensions, but there are great possibilities of questions from this topic itself, and that's why you should be ready, because in the recent time, it is being reviewed again and again, and that's how there is more possibility of the questions which are coming. But then in this particular question, we need to briefly talk about Itihasa-Purana tradition, and in the second part we have to discuss about basically that how come they are helping us in creating the history, or what sort of information they had been passing on. This is what we are supposed to discuss. Now this question must be divided into multiple parts, or let's say subheadings, that can help you to structurize this answer in a better way, such as the first part is undoubtedly the introduction, where you need to define it. The second part is there you need to write about the definition of this Itihasa and Purana. The third part where you need to discuss the historical context. The fourth part where you need to discuss about the debate, because it is asking you to critically examine. The fourth part, Itihasa and Purana as a source of history, and the fifth part is basically conclusion. So when it comes to first part, how to write the introduction. In the introduction, you are going to simply write that Itihasa-Purana tradition refers to the narrative and the textual tradition in ancient India that includes Mahabharata, Ramayana and Puranas. These texts are more often viewed as a combination of mythological narratives, genealogical records and social and cultural tradition. That's how you are just going to start this answer. Moving to the second part, then you need to write about the definition, and in this definition you will be writing that Itihasa, which literally means thus indeed it was. And when it comes to Puranas, the simple or the literal meaning of Purana is the ancient or primordial, right? Primordial. So that's how you're just going to define it. You can include the view of Romila Thapar also, because she says that actually they might not be exactly history, but they were having the historical consciousness, and that's how you can start your answer in the second part. The third part, as I told you, that there you need to write about the historical context. So since it is asking you about Itihasa-Purana tradition, it is not asking you about Itihasa and Purana, and that's how you need to write the historical context of it. And there will be writing that actually this tradition can be noticed or can be traced back even to the Vedas. In fact, I'll say Rig Veda, because in Rig Veda and rest of the Vedas, including the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and Upanishads, you can find that this particular tradition was there. And how do you find this tradition? So I think there are several versions, several parts of the Rig Veda or the rest of the Vedas, and they were dealing with some sort of historical content, such as there is one section of Rig Veda which is called as Dana Stuti, then there is another one that's called as Narsamsis, then you can talk about Akhyas, then you can talk about Gathas. So basically all these things, Dana Stuti, Narsamsis, Gathas and Akhyans, they were very much present in the Vedas itself. And why were they there in the Vedas? Because whenever it comes to performing any rituals, or whenever it comes to the question of legitimization, now in most of the rituals you can find that the people or the patrons, or else being more precise we can say jajmans, since they had been looking for some sort of legitimacy, and that's why they had been always trying to connect themselves with their ancestors And that's how, like, you find that this tradition is coming, that's called as Dana Stuti, Akhyans, like, Narsamsis and, Gathas. So this is how even in the Rig Veda also there was some sort of consciousness was there for history, and specifically it was more there in a heroic tradition. So all those who wanted to, like, legitimize their heroic acts or their heroism, they had been trying to connect themselves with their past. So basically, as far as this tradition is concerned, it was very much there in those Shruti literature. But the moment you go further and then you find the writing of Itihasas, epics basically, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and then the Puranas. So basically it shows a transition. So according to Romila Thapar, when it comes to the historical, or let's say Aitihasic tradition in Vedas, there it was there in an embedded form. Why embedded form? Because they were not referring any historical event directly, rather it was indirectly presented. So historians may extract certain information from there, but the moment it comes to Puranas and epics, so they are more in form of externalized history. That's how, according to Romila Thapar, it was a transition from embedded history to externalized history, because now the historical events are directly presented, and that's how this transition can be noticed. Now when it comes to epics, now in the epics it is believed, or in many tradition it was believed, that actually they are based on some sort of historical events. So that's why they are being called as Itihasa. Why? Because the historical events are presented over there. When it comes to Puranas, which were also referred as fifth Veda by some of the Brahmins such as Satpat Brahmin or the Gopat Brahmin, so they are referring it as fifth Veda, and the composition of the Puranas took place in a longer period of time. But when it comes to the compilation of this, that could be noticed somewhere in the middle of the first millennium C. And why was it? Basically in the first millennium BC, in the middle of the first millennium BC, that was roughly the Gupta and the post-Gupta period, India or Indian land had been going through so many political, economic and social, even religious transformations or the transitions. So basically in order to legitimize all these things, they had been going for writing of Puranas, because it was basically a mean through which they had been trying to legitimize. As you all know that during the post-Gupta period, you can find that there were so many changes are happening. First of all, after the fall of Guptas, you can find that there were so many regional dynasties are coming into appearance. At the same time, you see that with the inclusion of the tribals into the mainstream society, now even in the religion also multiple changes were going on. So in both the areas, the legitimacy is somehow becoming very important. As far as the political classes are concerned, since all these political classes were not necessarily coming from any Kshatriya family, and that's how legitimacy meant a lot to them. And they, in order to going into the past through the Puranas, they were trying to connect themselves either with the Chandravamsi or the Suryavamsi Kshatriya families, and that's how they had been trying to legitimize. On the other hand, legitimize themselves. On the other hand, we can say, when it comes to the religious changes, so since along with the inclusion of tribals, their religious patterns and the beliefs were also included within the religious tradition, larger religious tradition, and that's how the legitimacy of these were also needed, and that's how Puranas were even covering that also, correct? So since Puranas had been covering some of the religious aspects, and that's why these were called as fifth Vedas, but then what were the primary objectives that I did tell you. So basically, this is how we can say the Puranas and the epics are coming into existence. Now it comes to the next part of the question, and there you need to talk about basically the debate. So when it comes to debate, so you can refer about basically some of the old scholars, those who outrightly discarded the historical value of epics and Puranas, because among them we can refer James Mill, then we can also refer Hegel, and they had been discarding by saying this, actually they do not have any sort of historical sense and the consciousness, and in fact they said there is no historical importance of these texts because they are completely mythical, and that's how they cannot be even used for writing history because they are completely mythical. But then this was countered later on, and in fact when it comes to countering their arguments, so mainly you have to include the views of Romila Thapar, then Pargeter is there, then V.S. Pathak is there. So these are some of the scholars. Again, I am repeating the name: Romila Thapar, then Pargiter. I think you should start with the Pargiter because his book was coming long back in 1922, and then it comes to Romila Thapar, Romila Thapar, and she was followed by basically V.S. Pathak. That was another author. So all these three scholars have tried to somehow convey this idea that they cannot be discarded, or their importance cannot be discarded by simply saying this that they were not of historical importance. Because as Romila Thapar is arguing, in fact Pargiter is also saying, like, he is mainly focusing on the genealogical information which had been provided in the Puranas. On the other hand, Romila Thapar is simply saying, there is an externalized history that can be noticed in them, and they are somehow giving the information which are of great importance of history. So that debate you need to mention, and that's how I will be proving, actually maybe they cannot be directly called as history, but then definitely they do have great value for value for history, and that's how they cannot be discarded just by saying as a mythological narrative. Then it comes to the second last part, and there will be writing that what sort of informations are being drawn from it. So when it comes to the information, we can write again in certain categories or certain subheading. So first of all, it comes to Puranas. So you can mention about the division of Puranas as Sarga, Pratisarga, Manvantaras, then Charitas and Vamsanucharitas, and then you'll be writing they have been providing epics and Puranas have been providing multiple kind of information. Okay, right. Point number one. In point number one, you need to write about the geographical information. So Purana, since they had been talking about the evolution, or let's say creation and recreation of the world, so in that particular concern they had been discussing about or they had been providing us information about India's weather condition, the climate, and then topography of India. All these informations are being provided. Moving to the next is undoubtedly the political information. Now in the political information, we can talk about first of all the genealogies. Now the genealogies from, let's say, Mauryan times to the Gupta times has been categorically provided over there. The historicity may be a bit doubtful, but then they are there. And in fact, you can refer various texts such as Matsya Puran, Vayu Puran, then Brahmand Puran. You can refer the case study of Satvana also, because these three Puranas, Matsya Puran, Vayu Puran and Brahmand Puran, they had been giving the listing of 47 rulers, those who ruled within the Satvana kingdom. So that's how they are very categorically giving us information about the genealogies. But apart from this, there are so many events of historical events are also being referred or discussed in the Puranas. So I have already told you that what were the objectives behind it. That's why they had been discussing all these kind of things. So that's why you can discuss about some political incidents or the events are also being mentioned over there. Moving to the next is undoubtedly the social and the cultural information. Now that is the best part of the Puranas, I must say, in fact epics and Puranas, or let's say Itihasa and Purana. So since they were being developed in different time zones or the time frames, and that's how they had been presenting or they had been incorporating the information pertaining to those eras in a very precise way. So when it comes to the various social systems such as Varna, or various social institutions such as Varna, caste, gender, Gotra, so they have been categorically providing information on them. They have been also talking about the social values and the giving information on social values and the cultural values. They do give us information precisely on the status of women, and that we had already discussed in the previous question where I was telling you that how come Ramayana and Mahabharata had been providing us information on them. So that's how social and cultural information. Then it comes to religious and philosophical information. Undoubtedly, the way I did tell you that to a certain extent Mahabharata and Ramayana, and to a greater extent I must say Puranas, are precisely having this objective of incorporating the future developments coming into the society, and that's how categorically they had been providing us information. Specifically when it comes to the religious development in the post-Gupta period, when the various cults were emerging and these cults were gradually being incorporated into the larger framework of Brahmanism. So these informations are categorically provided here. So apart from these religious developments, whereas ideas related to basically such as bhakti, karma, moksha, right, no, like all these informations are also being provided. So that's how it does provide very good information on the religious aspects also. So that's how, like one more aspect you can write, that is about the hagiographies. So it is like dealing with the life sketch of the various sages, which is known as hagiography. So that is also somehow being provided to us. Now it comes to the critical dimensions, though you can avoid it because you have to write, because how far it is the question is asking. So in that case, like whatsoever problems are there in any religious literature, such as like the consciousness of time is missing, then you can talk about basically the consciousness of space is not like up to the mark. Then you can talk about authorship is quite debatable. Then extrapolation and interpolation remain another problems. Then like the gap between the composition and compilation, that also remains a sort of larger problem. So all these problems should be listed. These problems we have discussed earlier also, and that's why I'm like keeping it short. So after writing this, he'll be coming to the conclusion wala part, and in the conclusion he'll be writing there is great importance of Itihasa and Purana or Itihasa-Purana tradition in ancient India, because somehow, as Romila Thapar argues, it is a transition from embedded to externalized history, and that's how they are of great importance. If they are juxtaposed or they are corroborated with the other available sources, in that case they do come up with very valuable historical information, and that's how they are proved as a very good source of ancient Indian history. That's all. So I hope this information was useful to you. Thank you very much.